Hi friends, this is Marilyn from tarotclarity.com, and today's video is a video that essentially says you just can't have too many copies of the Vieville Tarot. I know I have shown a comparison between the Sivilixi deck, which is a facsimile deck based on the one from the National Library of France, and I know I've compared it with the Flornoy, or in English, sometimes we call it Flornoy. Now, the Flornoy copy only does not have the pips. It has two sets of the trump cards in both orientations, and I'll get to the reason why in a little bit later in the video. So I have done comparisons with these two decks. But today's video, I think essentially, although we'll reference the Flornoy a little bit, would be a comparison between Joseph Peterson's brand new release. I think it's only been out like 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks, and of the Vieville, and comparing it with the Sivilixi, which is essentially a facsimile deck. Now, this is a telescope box, which is different than the Peterson box for the Noble, and just like with the Sivilixi deck, it has, as well as the trump cards, it has the pip cards. The Vieville deck is, believed to have come around as a contemporary deck to the Noble around the same period of time, 1650, right? But it's a little bit different than the Noble Tarot. Now, although it's not marked on the box anywhere or inside the box, it's my understanding that I have deck number 50 out of a 250 card run. So I'm telling you this for your own information, because there's only 250 cards that have been printed. And if I already have 50, they're not going to last much longer. So if you're interested in buying a copy of the Peterson Vieville, I probably wouldn't waste too much time. Now, as I mentioned in correspondence, email correspondence, he indicated that I got number 50 out of 250, but it also is verified with this, note that he sent me. So when you do get your paperwork, hold on to it, because that would be where you find out about the number in the run, for those of you who are interested. And Joseph Peterson sent me a nice note indicating that the changes he made were to bring to life the deck as it appeared, or it may have appeared, back in the day when it was a brand new deck and not a 350-year-old deck that we have with the Sivilixi. Excuse me. And then he goes on to explain that he's written a book with his daughter that's yet unpublished, but I'll be looking for that. And hopefully I'll find out before it's been out too long. So just let's take a look at the deck. Now, the first thing that I've noticed is that he prints it in the orientation, the same orientation as the National Library of France. And there are some color tweaks and registration tweaks. For example, we notice in person, at least, I'm not sure how well it's picking up on the video, but the orange of the National Library of France, or the Sivilixi copy, the orange kind of looks like a dark mustard, a dark orange mustard, like a brown, almost not quite a brown mustard, but like a darker, not a yellow mustard color, but like a darker orange one. Whereas in the Peterson, it's more, those areas are more salmon, and he does retain the yellow in certain areas where he believed, I suppose, that the yellow did exist. So there are some slight color changes. Also, you know, it's worth mentioning, you know, the walking stick of the Fool having the head of a jester, which may be a reference to a mirror, you know, something else altogether. I think I've mentioned it in other videos. I'm not sure, but it would be probably a fun video to talk about at a later date. And we see too that the Peterson's deck is a little cleaner with not as much background noise. You know, we see some flecks, you know, in the background here, which maybe you're not picking up on the film or on the video, but it's cleaner. There's not a whole lot of flecks, you know, that are occurring. Plus, you notice in the registration, you know, it's more centered here. We have an even border, whereas in the National Library of France Sivilixi version, not all the cards are, you know, nicely centered. You know, some of them are a bit askew because of the way they were cut or whatever. I should mention, I guess, that the Sivilixi copy from the National Library of France is a little bit taller, but they're the same width. You can see it better when we compare the backs, right? So you can see that the Peterson, you know, is, I think, pretty close to being a facsimile deck, except with the registration as it would ideally have been, and also the color as he believes it would have looked when it was brand new. The differences are very subtle. It's just got a fresher, cleaner look. You know, more even borders. And the yellow is crisper. It's still not a bright yellow. It's still not a bright yellow, but it's less aged looking than the orange. And you know, here we have a case in point of was it reversed or not. You know, fortitude is not typically number 9, but it is 11, right? So if we look at the adjusted deck by Flornoy, we see that when we reverse the image, it satisfies the 11, right? The it's common number in sequence. And with this one, you know, in the Marseille, we're accustomed to seeing like a donkey and an ape, you know, on the wheel. You know, in here, you know, I almost see, you know, like a hare. And there was a tradition in Italy of the rabbit and the hound, you know, like hunting, right? Which makes sense on the Wheel of Fortune in the sense of sometimes you're the rabbit being hunted and sometimes you're the dog doing the hunting, right? And in this one, you know, I can see where this might have been a hare that at some point might have been confused as a donkey because the ears are sort of similar. Now, we're not getting an ape here or a dog. So it's kind of interesting. And again, with the Hermit card, we have 11, which is not typically the number associated with the Hermit, but number 9 is. So if we reverse it, as Flornoy did in one of the copies that he furnishes in his deck, we see that if, a simple flip over gives us the 9 with the Hermit. And also with this Hermit card, who is generally in Tarot of Marseille associated with holding a lantern, right? In the Italian decks, it was an hourglass, which kind of morphed into a lantern. And I pointed this out in a couple other videos I've done. And off the top of my head, I can't recall if it was the Metelli or the Minchiati. It might have been the Metelli, but I won't bet anything on it. But one of those two decks, the card that we now associate as being the Hermit card holding a lantern was originally the star card of an older man holding a lantern with stars in the sky, and somehow morphed into the Hermit card of the French decks. And I don't think we're seeing any flame or lantern in this. Now, some people might say, well, that looks like a flame or a lantern, but I don't think it is. And I think what it is, and the Flornoy kind of makes it a little easier to see when he cleaned it up, is that we have the red outside tunic, right? And then on the inside is yellow. And then this scrap of fabric is really like a fold, which just shows the outer side, which is this color, right? And then this being the edge of a gown. So it's not even a walking stick. It's just the edge of his cloak or whatever. So, in the Vieville, although the inner side of the cloak is bright yellow, which kind of connects you to the brightness of a lantern, I'm not sure that's what we're seeing here. He's holding his fabric, which twists and turns, so that this kind of, this hermit of the Vieville almost looks like there's no lantern or hourglass. It's just an older man who may or may not be holding a stick, depending on whether or not this registers in your mind as the edge of a fabric, the edge of his fabric, or if it's a walking stick. And this thing, could be seen as a flame. And maybe this is where the idea of a flame or a lantern came to be, because maybe it was misunderstood to be a flame, and so they put it in a lantern. Maybe this is the moment where that thought process began, because here it really just looks like when Flornoy cleaned it up, it really just looks like the folds of fabric, and that he's holding his cloak. Well, we may never know the truth. And then, coupled with the Metelli deck or the Minchiati deck, and I wish I thought of it before I started this video, where this image was seen with, stars in a lantern, which was, in that deck, it was the star card. So maybe, this is how things get confused, right? Maybe. And again, we have the number 12 card being the hanged one, the hanged man. But, I would argue that it's, an accident. We all know that the hanged one, le pendu, is hanging, right? But that would make the number 8 rather than the number 12. So it's possible that the numbers were put on at a different time, and whoever was, printing or registering or putting on the numbers right, printing the numbers, wasn't aware that this was the correct orientation. And some people would argue to the death that this is the correct way, that the Vieville intended it to be. And I can't speak on that. I'm just going with like my own brain and common sense tell me. And again, here you can see the registration is better, the card. And you've probably been noticing it all along, that the cards of the Peterson are better centered. And there isn't any sacrifice really to what appears in the Vieville. It's just some of the background noise has been cleaned up. You don't see a lot of the flecks. I don't know if you see this, maybe it's stain or whatever, but none of that appears in the Peterson. But even the chipped number appears, so he's just honoring, he's honoring what's there, except maybe not the blots or the flecks of dirt or mold or whatever, and the adjustment of color to what he thought was more genuine than what we see all these years later. Okay, again, another case in point, we can clearly see that the words written on the 14th card, sol fama, only fame or only your legacy or whatever that means, right, is backwards. So maybe whoever printed this, didn't pay attention, or maybe they were illiterate not to even be aware that this was in reverse. So in one of the copies that Flornoy provides us with, we see the 14th card in the opposite orientation, which allows us to see the script as it was meant to be read. And so I think that, these kind of mistakes, if you want to call it, can account for why, decks throughout the years, are in different orientations, right? They're in different order. Here we see the belly face of the devil, which we see in the Italian decks. And the Tower card, which is some type of celestial event involving a tree and a shepherd and his flock. These little guys here are sheep. Here's the shepherd. We don't necessarily see a lightning bolt or anything like that, although there seems to be contact between the rays and the tree, and certainly the flutter of activity with the balls of energy. And we have the star. As an astronomer, he has his calipers as tools. Again, you notice how the centering of the original facsimile deck is askew, and Peterson adjusts for that. And the sun card, the moon card. Now, we've seen this image on the sun card. It's in some decks, right? But here we have it as a woman who is often associated with the moon, doing work that is often associated with women's work, like the spinning of thread, right? So we have, an image of a moon frontal facing, maybe some type of solar or lunar eclipse or something like that. And again, we see this image associated with the sun, right? The same kind of image. So it's easy to understand how through the years, images got kind of mixed up or confused, right? And here we have the sun card, which we've seen before. I believe we've seen it in the Solabusca, something similar, and as recently as the Waite Coleman Smith decks, right? With a youth with a flag under a sun. the angel or the judgment card has not changed much. You know, an angel blowing a horn with a flag that shows what could be considered a Christian symbol associated with judgment or, oh, what's the other word? I can't think of the other word. But, you know, atoning, not atoning, but, you know, seeing your own life with clear light, right? And here again, you can see that it was cut askew originally, and the Peterson adjusts for that. And then we have the World card, where the central figure looks more male, which makes it seem more likely that it is the ascended Christ, you know, Christ's ascension, you know, Christ being in heaven with the 4 evangelists, 1 in each corner. And I'm not going to show you all the cards of the pip suits, but I will point out that in the facsimile deck of the Sivilixi, Patrick Coke deck, we can see bleed through from what was on the other side of the paper, or if the paper, the inks were drying one on top of the other, we see some type of bleed through, right? Which may be fascinating for some people, but that has been removed from the Peterson so that it is the deck as ideally it would have looked, right? Continuing the tradition of how it was drawn. He didn't like make perfect the way it was drawn. It's drawn the way it was drawn, but, you know, getting rid of those blotches that were not intentional and would have been the way the deck probably was supposed to look. So it's a lovely deck. I'm happy to have it. And I just wanted to make it known to you guys that it's out there. And again, if you want a copy of it, I probably wouldn't waste too much time, because I already have number 50 and there's only 250 run. And when it's done, it's done. So until next time, friends, I hope you enjoyed this video. Give me a thumbs up if you liked it. Share me with your friends. Share my site with social media. I would appreciate that. And until next time, peace and stay well.